What if I told you about a 45-year war? A war that resulted in the deaths of 25 million people. It was a war between two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. But here's the strange part, they never directly fought each other. Instead, their battles were fought through proxy wars all around the globe, and those conflicts changed our world forever. Today, we will discuss the Cold War. Summarizing this entire 45-year period in one short video is an oversimplification, of course. But we will try to answer the key questions. Why did the Cold War happen? What was it, really? And how did it begin and end? The year was 1945. World War II had finally ended. 6 years of global devastation had left 70 million people dead. Another 70 million were homeless. Countless cities lay in ruins. And as soon as the fighting stopped, the old world order collapsed. The great powers of Western Europe, who had ruled the world for 500 years, were now weak and exhausted. A power vacuum was created, and into that vacuum stepped two new giants. From the ashes of World War II's devastation, two new superpowers rose, the Soviet Union and the United States. But the tension between them was not new. It existed both during and even before that Great War. You see, the United States and its allies in Western Europe were the champions of capitalism. The Soviet Union was the champion of communism. To the West, communism was seen as a disease, a dangerous idea they felt they must stop. This is why, starting from the Russian Revolution in 1917 and through the 1930s, Western nations put intense economic pressure on the Soviets. They imposed many sanctions and tried to keep the Soviet Union alone and isolated from the world. Yet, during World War II, these bitter enemies were forced to become allies. They had one common and terrible enemy, Nazi Germany. However, this alliance was formed out of compulsion. In fact, history books often call it a marriage of convenience. Here's what happened. In June of 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa and attacked the Soviet Union. Suddenly, a huge and brutal war was raging between the USSR and Germany. The Soviet Union desperately wanted the United States and Britain to open another front. They wanted them to attack Germany from the west. This would split the German army, reduce the pressure on the Soviets, and break the Nazis in a two-front war. But the United States and Britain decided not to do that, at least, not right away. They believed that a direct, head-on fight with Hitler's army at that time would be too risky. They thought it would be a foolish move. So, they waited. Why not attack the soft underbelly of Europe? Winston Churchill famously suggested this strategy. He said, "We should strike at the soft underbelly of Europe to weaken the German army." Because of this, the Allies focused on the south. They first attacked North Africa, and then they moved into Italy. Meanwhile, a brutal war was still raging between the Soviet Union and Germany. It never stopped. So, by the time the United States and Britain were ready to directly fight the German army in Western Europe, launching their big Normandy attack in 1944, the Soviet Union was already battling about 80% of the German forces. This shows that even when allies share the same enemy, they can disagree on battle plans. One leader says, "Let's do it this way," and the other says, "Let's do it that way." Then, when World War II finally ended, the tension between the Soviet Union and the United States grew rapidly. A new kind of war began, not with soldiers and tanks, but with ideas and threats. This was the war of ideologies, known as the Cold War. American strategists learned three major lessons from the Second World War. First, they decided they must never allow a single alliance, or a single country, to dominate the entire landmass of Eurasia. This is the vast region between Europe and East Asia, and it is extremely rich in resources. This exact situation happened in 1940 when the Axis powers occupied this very territory. That occupation was the spark for the whole global conflict. The ultimate goal was to make sure a threat like Adolf Hitler could never rise to such power again. Second, the surprise attack by Japan on America's naval base at Pearl Harbor delivered a powerful lesson. The United States realized it could no longer rely solely on defensive bases far from home. The era of feeling safe behind two great oceans was over. The world had changed. Dominance could no longer be achieved from the sea alone. America realized it needed a new strategy. First, technology would have to be upgraded. New air bases and naval bases would have to be built all around the world. This was to stop any threat before it could grow. The second lesson was even bigger. America saw that it now had to lead in every way. It had to be at the very front, not just in navy and air power, but also in economic and industrial power. America understood it had to become number one. So, a new goal was set. America's strategy focused on two things: gain control of the vast Pacific Ocean, and keep firm control of the Western Hemisphere. The age of simple sea power was over. A new age of global air, sea, and industrial power had begun. After World War II, the nations that lost the war, like Germany, Italy, and Japan, were in ruins. They needed to be rebuilt. The idea was to help them recover, so they would not turn into enemies in the future. America believed that to have lasting peace and stability in the world, capitalism had to spread. This is a system based on free trade, open investment, and the free flow of goods between countries. The belief was simple: if all countries adopted capitalism and grew their economies, then every nation would experience peace and progress. This vision was hopeful, but it also served America's own interests. So, they had a big idea. American leaders argued that free trade between nations would lead to global peace and harmony. But let's be clear, the biggest winner in this plan was America itself. By the year 1945, America had become the world's largest capitalist powerhouse. It was producing half of all the world's goods and services. This meant that no matter where global trade happened, America would benefit more than anyone else. Their belief was simple: if every country played by these new capitalist rules, every nation would grow richer. And if everyone was prospering, then the dangerous idea of communism would never even take root in other countries. This wasn't just a hopeful theory. This was America's master strategy, and they started putting it into action even before World War II had ended. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, America made new economic agreements with its allies. They also created powerful institutions, like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. America was doing exactly what it had planned, to grow its global power. By 1946, the United States had built military bases in many countries around the world. Now, most of the world's powerful nations were following America's lead. Some followed willingly, like France and Britain. Others followed because they had to, like Germany and Japan. But the biggest obstacle was the Soviet Union, because they had a completely different vision for the future. They believed in security through control. The Soviet Union suffered terrible losses in the Second World War, losing an estimated 25 million lives. Germany had tried to invade them through Poland not once, but twice, first in World War I, and again in World War II. This painful history taught the Soviet leadership two very clear lessons. First, Germany must always be kept weak. They had been bitten twice, and they would not let it happen again. Their belief was simple: a weak Germany could never rise up and attack them through Poland a third time. Second, it became absolutely crucial to create a protective buffer zone in Eastern Europe. This meant controlling countries like Poland and its neighbors. These countries would act as a shield, absorbing any future attack. To build this shield, the Soviet Union established loyal communist governments in East Germany, Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. After World War II, these nations in Eastern Europe became known as Soviet satellite states. Remember, America saw communism as a kind of disease that could spread. So, all of this was a direct threat to the American vision for the world. Once the war ended, a huge question appeared. What would happen to Germany? Both the Soviet Union and the United States had major interests there. The solution was to split the country in two. West Germany went to the Western Allies, who set up a capitalist system. East Germany went to the Soviet Union, which installed a communist government. For the United States, rebuilding West Germany was now a top priority. They believed that if their half of Germany became prosperous under capitalism, if it became the economic heart of Europe, then people would see its success and reject communism. Now, people could see a clear difference. The capitalist side of Germany was making tremendous progress. Because of this, the work of rebuilding Germany truly began. But this progress posed a major threat to the Soviet Union. Remember, Germany had already attacked them twice in the past. Moscow wanted Germany to stay divided and weak. You see, Germany was split into two parts, representing two opposite ideas. For the United States, a strong and successful Germany was essential. But for the Soviets, that same success would be a direct threat. So, between 1946 and 1949, America worked closely with its Western European allies. They created new treaties, built strong alliances, and designed the Marshall Plan. Through this Marshall Plan, the United States provided a huge aid package, $13 billion, directly for rebuilding Europe. "Let's rebuild Europe," he said. In response, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was established. This further strengthened European security. Because America was such a powerful military force, it provided a protective cushion. It was like having a big brother. On the other side, the Soviet Union tightened its hold over Eastern Europe. They established a communist government in Czechoslovakia by force. They also crushed an anti-communist uprising in Hungary. Then, by the year 1949, Germany was officially split into two separate countries. The United States led the West, and the Soviet Union led the East. The famous words of Winston Churchill proved true, as the Iron Curtain descended across Europe. With these two powerful systems now in place, their attention turned toward Asia. It was a time when many Asian countries were just recovering from war and had recently won independence from colonial rule. For the two superpowers, Asia became a stage to share their ideas and test their strength. Regarding China, the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949, and Mao Zedong established a communist regime there. China then aligned with the Soviet bloc, marking the rise of two neighboring communist powers in Asia. As the world's superpowers formed their alliances with nations across the globe, a sudden and shocking event unfolded in 1950. Backed by China and the Soviet Union, North Korea launched an attack on South Korea. And who stepped in to support South Korea? America and its allies. This marked the beginning of the Korean War, the first major battlefield of the Cold War. Here's the crucial part: the superpowers never fought each other directly. Instead, they fought through helpers, or proxies. This conflict cost millions of lives. On one side, China and the Soviet Union aimed to spread communism across Korea. On the other, America and its friends fought to keep capitalism there. So, what was the final outcome? The war ended without a clear winner, a stalemate after millions of lives were lost. The same pattern then appeared in Vietnam. North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, backed by China and the Soviet Union, fought against South Vietnam, which was supported by America. This marked the beginning of the Vietnam War. Around this time, communist movements were also growing in Burma, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Whenever America saw a rising communist movement in a country, it supported any force opposing it. The United States provided weapons and money to countries fighting against communism. But these wars in Asia were not just about ideas. They were also about resources, trade, and power. America wanted to extend its influence across Southeast Asia, with a special focus on Japan. It was absolutely vital for America that Japan did not fall into the communist bloc. That would have been a devastating strategic loss. After the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, America's goal shifted to rebuilding Japan. The aim was to create a strong, capitalist ally, a country where America could trade freely and maintain its military and economic dominance, particularly in the Pacific Ocean. And after 1950, the Cold War was no longer confined to Europe and Asia. Its shadow stretched across the globe, reaching into Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. By this time, the world was effectively divided into three spheres of influence. After the Second World War, the global powers divided the world into three categories. They called these the First, Second, and Third Worlds. The First World was the United States and its allies. The Second World was the Soviet Union and its allies. And the Third World? That included all the countries that were newly freed from colonial rule. So, imagine this: these new nations were just born into independence, and they opened their eyes to see the world was already split in two. There were two major superpowers, two giants, the Soviet Union on one side, and the United States on the other. These two superpowers gave every new country a difficult choice. They had to pick a side, join the West Bloc with America, or join the East Bloc with the Soviets. You had to support either one or the other. Pakistan was also faced with this decision, and we chose the American bloc. The point is, for decades, every new country had only these two options: go here, or go there. This great rivalry between the two superpowers just continued on and on. During the Cold War, both superpowers had immense power. They could orchestrate a coup in any country they wanted. They could assassinate leaders anywhere. For example, America tried to interfere in the politics of Vietnam, Guatemala, Iran, and Cuba. They tried to change governments. On the other side, the Soviet Union tried to establish its influence in places like Afghanistan and Africa. Here is the important point. Of the 20 million people killed in the fighting between these two giants, 19.8 million were from third world countries. This means the true, terrible cost of the Cold War was paid by the poorer nations of the world, who just wanted to live in peace. Now, from 1950 to 1980, these two powers came very close to even starting a nuclear war, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But each time, they would back down. So, while this dangerous tension was brewing between them, Europe, where the whole rivalry began, had actually entered a period of relative stability and peace. For a long time, the two superpowers did not try to invade each other's land. The conflict began in Europe, but it soon spread across the entire world. Now, the tension could be felt everywhere. Battles, both real and ideological, were happening all over the globe. Strangely, the source of it all, Europe, began to calm down. And in an unexpected twist, the Cold War effectively ended right where it started, in Europe, in Germany. So, the conflict expanded across the planet, only to finally collapse back at its very origin. Earlier, in the 1950s and 1960s, the Soviet Union and the United States were locked in a frantic nuclear arms race. Both were developing terrifying new nuclear weapons and the technology to deliver them. Then, by the end of the 1960s, a new idea took hold. It was called mutually assured destruction. A frightening, almost unthinkable theory. This idea stated that the two nations had become so powerfully armed that if a nuclear war ever started between them, there would be no winner. Both countries, and possibly the entire world, would be completely destroyed. By 1980, the Soviet Union's economy was in serious trouble. The cost of the endless arms race was skyrocketing. These massive military expenses were crippling their economy. Then came their new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Save the house, because that's what he tried to do. He saw the problem clearly. He said, there is no point in just piling up more weapons. Sure, there was this crazy idea that we had enough bombs to destroy the whole world. But so what? You can't just fly to Mars and blow it up instead. So, Gorbachev made a big move. He started pulling Soviet troops out of Eastern Europe. Then, he gradually let the countries controlled by the USSR become independent. His goal? To lift that impossible burden off his country's shoulders. One by one, the countries of Eastern Europe began to gain their independence. We saw it in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany. Then, on November 9, 1989, something incredible happened. The people themselves, not soldiers or politicians, brought down the Berlin Wall in Germany. They literally took hammers and chipped away at that wall of division. Just a month later, the governments of East Germany and West Germany collapsed. And in 1990, they became one single country. Germany was reunified. A year after that, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself, the USSR, disintegrated. And with that, the Cold War was over. This great global struggle had started in Europe, spread across the entire world, and finally, it ended right back in Europe. When the dust settled, only one superpower remained standing. Only one nation had won this long, silent war, America. It now stood alone as the world's single superpower,